Hey everybody, it's Bust, and Riot has released the 3.10 patch. This is the big balance update patch after the release of the Worldwalker. And by goodness, we're going to talk about it a little bit. And so the way I'd like to approach this video is I want to talk about the way I kind of see the meta shaping up and the big changes coming out of this set of patch notes, and then we'll come into the individual cards themselves. I think it's good to give you like a little bit of context on the global scale before we talk about the cards individually. And so instead of just staring at this page for a moment, I am going to bring up the meta sheet as it currently is. I grabbed this right off of Balco sites, lor-meta.com, and then I've given these handy little arrows and boxes over to the left to kind of indicate what happened to these style of decks with this patch. And so first and foremost, the big thing to kind of talk about this patch, I believe, is that Bard didn't get nerfed. I think that this is immediately what Reddit is going to sink their teeth into and say, oh man, I knew Bard was the best card in the set since it came out. Riot's a bunch of dum-dums. And it kind of is what it is, you know? It's a card that kind of came into prominence within the last week or two. And Riot has to kind of get locked in with these big patches a couple weeks in advance. They didn't really have the time to react to the kind of onslaught of Bard that we've been seeing coming in. And so, without a doubt, within the past week, the Poppy variants of Bard, whether or not that's the Jarvan version or just Poppy Bard itself, have kind of jumped up to the top of the meta. But that's also worth noting that Ari Bard is jumping up there as well. Ari Bard currently the third one on the list here. And then you're going to see just a bunch of different flavors of it. Galio Bard hangs out down here in the A tier. In our battles throughout the past couple weeks, we've been seeing a bunch of like Freylord Bard. We made a video with like Diana Bard. The Bard, he's fucking everywhere, okay? And he actually even caught a buff this patch. And so just get ready for it. That just kind of puts you in this mindset of where you have to just be able to deal with a big board, right? The kind of advantages that the Bard decks are looking to take as their deck grows incrementally as the game goes on. If you can't deal with a bigger board by either going around it or going through it before it actually gets built up, then you're going to have some struggles. And so that's at least the thing to kind of take note of. But the second thing to talk about, the kind of big weakness that the Poppy Bard decks are going to have now, is that Demacia caught quite a nerf. Both Petricite Broadwing and Brightsteel Protector caught nerfs. Really affects not only the Jarvan Poppy Bard decks, but we were really kind of preaching this Demacia-based package in a lot of our videos as to where you're playing the one-cost Challenger Bird, I'll just call it Challenger Bird, I don't know, the Durandi Sculptor, the Petricite Broadwing, and then the Brightsteel Protector is kind of this early game core, and then you would just build up your deck however you wanted to do it, whether or not that was Bard or Misfortune or Poppy, it didn't matter. You could get Galio in there, you could get some kind of rallies. It was just some kind of board growth built on top of that board control package. Now that that's been significantly weakened, we're going to see all of these Demacia decks just weaken in value. And so that's kind of thing number two to kind of keep in the back of your head. Thing number three is Lysandra Talia is catching a bit of a nerf. I'm curious to see how bad it gets. They caught a nerf to the imagined possibilities. No, that's the wrong one. The thing that gives all of your units neg2 attack, and then you get the infinite possibilities in your hand. That infinite possibilities is now fleeting, so you can't like build up to a big thrall generator in like 2 turns away from now. You have to do it now, and then the oh, what was the other one? Oh, the Promised Future, whatever the thing that doubles your landmarks is, now costs 6 mana instead of 3. And so they don't sound like gigantic nerfs. I know a lot of the Talia Lysandra decks were only playing like 1 copy of the AoE, but you know, as they're looking at this screen here, it's the deck sitting at like a 54% win rate. If you cut that down to 2, like 2% out of it, it's, you know, kind of off the map. And so I'm expecting to see like a lot of Lysandra Talia kind of leave the format. And then what I think this kind of starts to bring in is kind of the onslaught back of pirates, right? I think this is what we're going to kind of see. We'll touch on it a little bit more in the future. But as a lot of the things that really pick on these pirates-based strategies, or as we're seeing more recently now, these Annie-based aggro strategies, the early game challengers have been removed, and now the AoEs are being removed, and so it gives those a good chance to really bust up through the meta. But the last two decks I wanted to talk about specifically, we have the tokens deck. They're going to catch some buffs. I think that's all going to be overhyped. Irelia is catching a bit of a buff, but the other cards don't really matter anymore. The Inspired Sandseer, whatever he is, the guy that gives a unit +2 attack when you summon it, and then the Windfarer Hatchling both caught buffs. I think that's mostly been replaced by Thousand-Tailed Saiyan. And I don't expect it to be that big of a deal. But granted, it's not a super fringe deck. It did have a big time in the spotlight as being completely busted, and I think it's going to make a surge even if it's not that great. The last one to talk about, Pantheon, just got blown up. The Scout can't be generated as an ability now. Zenith Blade only gives Overwhelm for one turn, and there's also those kind of Demacia changes that are bringing him some problems as well. I expect that Yuumi Pantheon is going to completely fall out of the format until they get either additional fated units or they get better fated attached kind of things, better fated targeted spells. Or they're just going to be kind of like fringe playable in Gauntlet. I don't think they're going to be the ladder monsters that they were anymore. But, kind of like scrolling back to this picture onto the next phase, if you take a look at all of the arrows, like the big red ones are indicating, decks that caught pretty significant nerfs. So that's Poppy Bard, Talia Lysandra, the Viego Deserter deck caught nerfs. The Deserter got nerfed. Yuumi Pantheon got nerfed to Oblivion. Galio Bard and Alawi Rally all taking these really heavy nerfs. And then some minor nerfs to Annie Jen with Disintegrate, Annie Ezreal with Disintegrate and Ezreal. And that kind of leaves the only untouched decks as Ari Bard and Heimerdinger Jace. And I think that's kind of interesting in that I think here in the past week or so, Heimerdinger Jace was kind of arguably the best deck in the format. Now it's pretty heavily unopposed. And then, of course, there's Ari Bard, which is, the kind of contender for the best deck in the format, unopposed as well. And I think that these are, kind of immediately what we're going to see shoot to the top of the meta. And so what I think the kind of like cycle of things that we're going to see is that Ari Bard is kind of the top deck in the world. The way that you tend to tackle Ari Bard is just by playing burn decks or really fast aggro decks. So your Annie Jins, your Annie Ezreals, your Pirates of the world are all very successful against Ari-based decks. And then the thing that just really kind of nukes those burn strategies is going to be Heimerdinger Jace, which was already arguably one of the stronger ones. If you want to start slamming the likes of Pirates into Heimerdinger Jace, you're gonna be in for a bad time. And so I do think that that's going to be kind of like the immediate trifecta that we see over the course of the next week. The Ari Bard, the Heimerdinger Jace, and then the burn-based aggro strategies. And then I think it'll probably take another week after that before people really come out and start to adapt and make some big changes into the meta. But those are the things I wanted to kind of keep in mind. The big Demacia nerfs, Bard still sticking around okay, tokens getting a boost, Talia Lysandra weakened a little bit, and then this kind of cycle that I think we're going to see of Ari Bard, Heimerdinger Jace, and the burn decks. You know what you're going to get out of our channel? It's going to be the burn decks. And so, first and foremost, the actual gameplay updates themselves. Again, Scout cannot be generated from keywords, whether or not that's Pantheon, whether or not that's the Arsenal. You can't generate Scout anymore. This is a pretty big negative to the likes of Pantheon and the Arsenal. And it's probably realistically just frees up a lot of design space in the future. This was like a pretty feels bad moment when your opponent hits like Scout Elusive or Scout Spell Shield or Scout Overwhelm, and just taking that Scout piece out. It should be pretty positive, right? It's still gonna feel bad when your opponent's like, herder, my 8 attack Victor hit Elusive when it already had Spell Shield. Whatever, that's gonna suck. That's at least gonna take away some of the really high impact feels bads without the scouts. Pretty happy to have that happen. The copied spells now count as being played. That's kind of whatever to me. I don't think there's anything that currently in the game that really matters for that. Nobody plays Karma. Nobody plays Tarek. Jace is kind of relevant, but I don't think that this is a super big change in terms of the current gameplay. But I think it is pretty good in terms of the future of the game. I think these are pretty intuitive changes. All right, on to the rest of the way. Ashe, she just got a text-based fix. If you frostbit a 0 attack unit, Ashe didn't get a bonus. Now she does. Bard, kind of interestingly, now buffs off of units that boost their own stats. And so This was like the very first deck I tried to make as soon as the Worldwalker came out. Was I wanted to play Bard Vi because I was really interested in playing Bard plus P and Z, and then having access to things like the cheap cycling units, like whatever that one cost 2/1 that cycles is, the Sump Dredger, things like Rummage. And then you're just like churning through your deck, which you can use to level up Vi. But then it's also searching your deck for chimes. And then as you draw more cards, you can get more chime hits. And I thought that was a neat and interesting little synergy. I put it together. I played a couple games, and I was like, why does my Bard never upgrade off of this Vi? And this was it. This was why. And so this is a thing. This is something we'll probably explore in the immediate future. But it's worth noting that Bard did catch a bit of a buff. I think that's the big thing that you're going to have to contend with coming out of this patch. On to Ezreal. He has been increased up to 8 targets. I think that's where he was like originally. I thought he was originally like 8, but now that he has access to copied spells, they pushed it back up. I feel like this was probably a needed nerf anyways. I feel like Ezreal's been fairly degenerate over the past few months. I don't really like his super uninteractive abilities, and so I'm kind of glad to see that catch a bit of a nerf. Hecarim, a bit of an interesting one. The ephemeral allies just get the +3 attack upgrade forever. That's pretty sweet. You used to run into these like really awkward situations as to where you would be getting like copies of Hecarim and he would die in combat, and then your future Hecarim attackers would all lose their bonuses in the middle of combat. Pretty nice to see that go away. The most nerfed and buffed unit across the course of the game, I believe. Finally catching some more buffs. We're finally in a world to where Hecarim isn't good enough. Brother's got to catch a buff. I don't fully remember how all that worked. Like, I know he went like they cut like a point of health, and then they gave him the point of health back, but cut a mana cost, and they pushed his mana back up and rearranged his stats. They did a bunch of weird shit. He's finally back in his original form, and then they said original form's not good enough. We got to buff him again. But sure, maybe there'll be something for ephemerals one day. They are starting to get more and more support. They just haven't really found that card that pushes them over the edge. And so I feel like they're kind of like teetering on the edge. As soon as we get another like couple of really hardcore strong ephemeral cards, I think this Hecarim is probably going to be pretty nasty, just not right now in the current meta. We did give a mention to Irelia. She picks up a tune. That's fine. I'm not the hugest fan of tokens decks being a thing. I don't think these are very fun to play against, but Irelia is a little bit stronger now. They did nerf her Flawless Duets to cost 2 mana, and so it is probably pretty reasonable to have her at least generate a mana, make those duets a little bit easier to play. On down the path, Callista upgraded from a 3/4 to a 4/3 to a 3/4. That's the same number of stats, but having 4 health is pretty monumental. Everything dies to 3 attack stuff, whether or not that was your Petricite Broadwings or your Get Exciteds or whatever. 3 health was kind of the barrier of acceptance, and then 4 health is the like, oh yeah, that's pretty decent, that's pretty good. And so I don't think that she's going to find a place just yet. There are some other interesting upgrades like Blighted Caretaker catching it going back up to 2 attack, but these are not strategies that ever really made it in Constructed. And so I think it's just the kind of payoff isn't there. The way I've always kind of looked to have Callista work is in like just a fearsome deck, and then if the allies thing kicks off, then fine. I just don't think that kind of proper world has shown itself, and then just playing a champion because it's fearsome is kind of a bummer. And so you can get fearsome off of the units. You usually want your champions to do something unique, and so just playing her as a unit was pretty meh. On to the next one. Shin now gives himself a barrier, and then that causes the level up to take 1 more tick. And so it technically takes the same amount of barriers to get him to level up, but he brings one onto himself now. It is a boost. I don't know. I've never really seen Shin be that good without a champion to really run with him. Right, Fiora Shin was a really strong deck there for a long time, but that was on the back of Fiora OTKs. Shin has seen some work with Jarvan, but investing all of this into a champion just hasn't really paid off. Again, maybe as more barrier cards are printed, Shin may have a place in the world. As more support cards are printed, Shin may have a place in the world. As it stands right now, I don't think this is going to be what brings him into relevance. Moving on, Aftershock drops from 4 mana to 3, but it does 3 damage to a unit instead of 3 damage to anything. Like, I was ready. I saw this Aftershock change, and I thought it was going to do 3 damage to anything or destroy a landmark. I thought it was just going to be a drop from 4 to 3, and I thought that that would bring up like a real interesting conversation in comparison to Decimate as to whether or not like a 3-cost slow removal that does some other stuff is worth it. Is that ever better than Decimate? Is it worse than Decimate? Like, does the 2 mana really worth that single point of damage? And I was in the camp of just like leaning towards probably, right? Aftershock probably just replaces Decimate in every deck in the world. But with it only targeting units now, I don't think this is really going to make it. I think there may be some kind of gauntlet strategy that looks for Aftershock. There may be some kind of really weird meta that's super landmark heavy that looks towards it. But where we live right now, I don't think Aftershock is going to make the cut. This is going to be a very fringe playable. On to the next one, Avatar of the Tides. Did not know this card even existed. It does stuff. It has a lot of text on it. I'm sure it's relevant. It's tougher to kill now. That wall of text still does the same thing. I'm not even going to bother reading it. If you know what it does, great. I hope you enjoyed it. I just don't think this point of health matters towards whatever this guy is. On to the next one. Avarosian Hearthguard caught his point of health back. I'm not sure if this was ever a nerf just due to Expedition, but he got his point of health back. This does bring up kind of like an interesting thing I didn't talk about. As we are throughout the rest of the video, we're going to see a lot of units just get boosted health. A lot of units get shuffled stats like Callista, where they went from 4-3 to 3-4 or from 3-3 to 2-4. I think that does bring kind of like an interesting thing into the meta as to where I think that Pirates are about to have a resurgence. But if you're starting to play a bunch of 2-4s, 2-4s interact very well with 3-2s, right? That's kind of the really aggressively strong price point on 2-cost units is having three attack, 2 health for 2-cost unit with upside, and having a bunch of these like 4 health units running around always makes it kind of interesting. And so I don't think the Hearthguard buff on its own is that impressive, but these are the kind of cascading changes as they add these small buffs to multiple cards to where you can kind of see these mid-range decks come to prominence. I'm not sure how long the meta would take for that to kind of shake out. And then from that point, when everybody's just playing mid-rangey decks, how long it takes for ghost decks just to beat everything. But those kind of cycles will happen in the future. It's just kind of like worth noting in the back of your head that if you've seen a bunch of pirates in your meta, it can be worthwhile to look towards Freylord and look towards Bandle City to a lot of these units that have boosted health stats now. But continuing on with that theme, Babbling Bjerg caught a point of health. Good job, my bro. The same things apply to you. Here, Blighted Caretaker catches the point of attack back. Was nerfed down to 1-1 a few patches ago, brought back up to the 2-1. The Slay decks haven't really been around that much, and so whether or not this will be enough to bring a resurgence of, say, like Thresh Nasus or the likes of the various Kindred decks, maybe. I think more so than those decks and this guy having 2 attack, it just kind of depends on how the meta breaks down, right? This is a pretty reasonable card against the likes of Ahri. It's pretty reasonable against the likes of Pirates. And so if we're able to, kind of get these 2-for-1s and 3-for-1s out of the Blighted Caretaker, even when it only had one attack, that, gave a point of reason to kind of investigate. But having the 2 attack and the potential for those huge blocks and huge shutdowns, is pretty important, and I do expect this to make a bit of a resurgence for the Shadow Isles. I talked, a bit of trash about the toughness boosts, but the singular point of attack I think here is actually pretty strong. On to one of the bigger ones in the format. The Brightsteel Protector is now a 2-1 instead of a 3-2. It's been a long time coming. This card has been too strong in the Challengers decks. These curves of just dropping a Challenger Bird on 1 into Brightsteel or dropping a Broadwing on 2 into a Brightsteel on 3 have been pretty oppressive for a long time. I think this should probably operate more just as a barrier generator and not a high quality collection of stats plus a barrier generator. I think that we're slowly starting to see Riot realize every 2-cost unit shouldn't have 5 stats plus upside. I think we're going to start seeing like what is minimal upside, right? And so we're going to see later, like Pharaoh's Fancier got nerfed. We saw Conchologist get nerfed. We're now seeing Brightsteel Protector get nerfed. I think we're going to kind of start to see, like, is this thing happening count as a spell? You know, does this give a full card, which is realistically what Barrier does? It's probably going to have, like, 2 or 3 stats for 2 mana. And then you're going to say, okay, well, does this do something minor? Say, like, something like Legion Grenadier. That's probably safe. And then it's probably safe to make like a vanilla 2/4, right? Or a vanilla 3/3 for 2 mana. We'll see how that breaks down, but that seems to be the way that things are kind of trending. Is if it's a card that kind of a 2-cost card that realistically just gives you another card, it should probably only have 2 or 3 stats. On further down, Camaveran Dragon catches a bit of stats. Good job. You're not seeing the Viego decks like we saw in Expedition, are we? The Viego Dragons aren't running around. Not to say Viego isn't a thing, but man, Camaveran Dragon, maybe you'll have a place in the sun one day. A little bit further, Chief Nanotac. This is one that caught a bit of that flip, right? He went from a 3/3 to a 2/4, makes him a little bit stronger against the really kind of go wide aggro based strategies, and now he also grants impact. He used to just heal and give +1/+1. Now he heals, gives +1/+1, and gives impact. I'm kind of interested in giving these a try, but we'll have to kind of see how things break out. A lot of the transform cards just aren't that good. A lot of the bad kind of Freylord transformy cards I'm just not super interested in. But we are seeing, again, a lot of things like Gnar Bard running around. And if you fit a minor transform theme into Gnar Bard, maybe that's good. I'm not sure. I don't think heal counts towards Bard. That's not giving stats. That's just healing stuff. So I don't think it counts. But this does do some stuff that actually, interacts well with Bard in terms of giving additional +1/+1 bonuses to things. And so may see something there in the Bard Nard with some of the transform kind of things. Crumble drops from 5 to 4 mana. This is one I thought was pretty interesting since it's attached to a Tellstone. I thought the Freylord Tellstones were pretty good. Not Freylord, the Shadow Isles Tellstones were pretty good, but there's not really like a Shadow Isles based aggro deck that's really excited about it. But as we kind of mentioned earlier with the things like Thresh Nasus and the Blighted Caretaker and decks that are, fine to attack with a small number of ephemerals, having access to the Tellstones either generating crumbles that you can then use for a slay or generating the +2/+2 ephemeral combat trick. Lots of interesting kind of power coming out of the Tellstones and a lot of kind of subtle and interesting tricks that are pointing themselves towards the slay decks again. So pretty interesting stuff there. Next, onto the Disintegrate. No real change, but if a preventative effect stops the damage, Disintegrate doesn't kill it. I thought it was really dumb that you could tough through a Disintegrate or you could barrier through a Disintegrate. You can't do that anymore now. I think this is a very intuitive upgrade and a very welcome upgrade. What is this? Ember Monk. He costs 1 less. Don't care. I don't think this go wide quick attack Yordles is ever what you're really looking to do. Their problem isn't getting attack power. Right? It's very easy for Yordles to just load up on attack. We've played a bunch of Yordles and did quite well with the likes of Paparo and Poppy. I was never looking for more. I was actually like cutting away some of the stat boosting cards. It's about getting Overwhelm or getting rallies. None of that really is relevant with Ember Monk. So here we have the Pharaoh's Fancier. He drops from 2 stats to 1. Very welcome change. The Pharaoh's Fancier is just way too strong. Glad to see those nerfs. One I was kind of curious if it would ever happen is the Gleaming Lantern. This is the one that I was worried Riot was going to wait until too long to nerf the Gleaming Lantern. I have felt for ages. I felt at the end of last season that Aphelios Fizz was just the best deck in the format. I feel like for a large part of the current season that Fizz Riven was the best deck in the format. I didn't play the Gleaming Lantern version of Fizz Riven, but a lot of people did. And then, within the past week or two, Ruben Zoo managed to take Aphelios Fizz to rank 1 on the ladder. And I was just ultimately worried that since the deck just doesn't get traction for whatever reason, I don't know why people aren't playing it, but they aren't, that the Gleaming Lantern wouldn't get hit until it was too late. And so I am kind of glad to see this proactive nerf to where it now dies to Mystic Shot, it dies to Challenger Bird and stuff like that. It makes it much less of a just kind of obvious blowout when your opponent on their turn 3 attack token does some stuff. You say okay, you play LOL Gleaming Lantern, then you follow up with 2 mana, and then you go to the next turn and you get the additional 2 free mana, and it's just like such a huge boost on a very stat relevant unit. And so glad to at least see like some of these things to where it's like, well, dies to Mystic Shot now. It makes him a little bit weaker. So on further, Hothead, now a 3/3 instead of a 4/2. The guy's still garbage. We can move on. I'm sorry, guy, but you're garbage. Inspired Marshall catches her points of stats back. She used to be a 5/6. Everybody quit playing tokens. She's now a 4/5. This is the one. I don't think the Windfare Hatchling change is going to matter. That comes up in a little bit. That one is completely replaced by Thousand-Tailed Saiyan. The Inspired Marshal is a slightly different one, though, in that it boosts all of your Blade Dances. It boosts all of your Sand Soldiers generated out of Emperor's Diaz and Aziran and the like. And so could be relevant here again. I don't think the stats were what was holding this card back, but, I don't think this hurts. I think we're going to see some tokens turn up. I think tokens are quite good against Ari Bard, and they're going to make an appearance. And so this is a minor frustration, I guess, but I don't think it's enough to push the deck into that top tier of relevance. Justice Rider, point of health, good job. I mean, I don't know how much it would take for me to actually want to play Justice Rider. If you made it a 4/5 for 4, maybe. But this just adding stats does not like really make me want to play any flashbang traps. It sounds miserable for everyone involved, both both playing this terrible landmark unit and for your opponent rolling the dice against flashbang traps. Fun game for everyone, let me tell you. All right, Kahiri the Returned costs 1 mana less at the cost of a couple of points of stats. This card's still garbage. No interesting build arounds with Kahiri. Have fun if you want to try. I hate Predict as a mechanic, and I don't like Kahiri, and so I don't think this will have a big change on anything. Lady of Blood catches a point of attack. That is, pretty necessary if you want her to be relevant. We saw with Shen forever that a 2/4 for 4 just isn't combat relevant, and so this was another kind of landmark card where you played it and it just sat there and it doesn't do anything. It can at least probably trade in a combat now and survive while still doing this fleeting thing. Now, I have played an excessive amount of discard Draven, and I have never wanted a card like Lady of Blood. And so I'm not entirely sure what it would take to want to have the Lady of Blood work. I think it would probably involve some kind of weird combo deck or some kind of like really excessive discardy kind of stuff. But in the current meta, she's not going to be relevant. She needs like another engine card to really help all of this stuff pop off. And then I don't even know what that looks like. What do you play? Like your Draven, you get a Spinning Axe, you play the Lady of Blood, you discard something to Spinning Axe, you get the Fleeting Copy, you discard the Fleeting Copy, you're getting like multiple stat bonuses or something. I don't know. There is that like 5/5 for 5 that gives +2 attack when you discard it. You just discarded it twice or something. I don't know. None of this stuff revs me up in my loins. This doesn't sound good at all. And I don't think the singular point of attack on Lady of Blood changes my mind on any of those ideas. On to the next one, Lava Lizard. This is the like 1/3 for 2 that flips when you deal damage to your opponent. They're starting to give all these transforms impact. And so he can be like kind of relevant. If you have Nanatuck on the board, he's going to have double impact. And so it's getting to be bigger and bigger and bigger. I think the transform is just kind of like 1 or 2 cards short of being relevant, though. And so maybe like one more transform card will come out, and then they'll really kind of pop off into relevance. I'm not entirely there yet. I've played a bit with the Lava Lizard, a bit with the Freylord transforms. Feels like it's just missing a little bit of something. And so it's one of those things that's worth like remembering in the back of your head that they're not terrible. They just need a little bit more to really pop off. One of the biggest change in the set, Legion Deserter switches from Overwhelmed to Fearsome. Very good. He needed it. I felt like that was a pretty abysmal deck to play against. I think Viego is kind of like up for nerf, but the Legion Deserter is kind of the safe one to go about in terms of taming Viego a little bit. And so a lot less of these just absurd draws to where you're like, LOL, I attack with 11 attack overwhelm, you take like 8 damage, and then I throw 11 to your face. Like that was fun and interactive. At least now with it just having Fearsome, much tougher to get those really kind of concerted OTKs, and it makes it a little easier to be like, well, I can kind of like pick and choose what damage I take. I can take like 5 or 6 damage and still be kind of safe from atrocity, and then otherwise it's like Legion Deserter just makes you go, oh well, why did I even try? Because he can just chunk in for so much damage. Okay, so Merkwolf Shaman into that territory of Transformers, catching a bit of a buff, switching from a 3/3 to a 2/4, and then having the +2 stat on the big side. So he goes from he gets +2/+2, right? But these transforms typically just got +1/+1. Anyways, he gets +2/+2 on his flip. Again, not quite good enough. This regenerate strategy hasn't really fleshed itself out well enough, and so it's kind of in this odd space to where the transform cards don't have enough card to make a transform deck. The regenerate cards don't have enough build around to play a regenerate deck. This guy kind of sits in the middle and doesn't do enough for either of them. And so again, maybe in the future this will be relevant. At the current point in time, not so much. What will probably be the biggest change in the patch for me, myself, Petricite Broadwing, now works like Challenger Bird. So it doesn't get Challenger until you summon another ally. And so, can't challenge with this on turn 2 anymore. I guess you can play like a 1 mana spell that generates a unit if you're really trying to do it, but it is going to slow this Broadwing down considerably. And so I think this is a very welcome nerf and a very good way to go about it that both kind of retains its identity of a challenger without just attacking its stat line or its cost line. When I saw the Broadwing on the list, I thought it was just going to maintain its current self but go up to 3 cost. I like what they've done here. This card definitely needed a nerf, and they've gone about it gracefully, if you will. It's still pretty interesting if you played on like turn 4 for the double nerf package and the Broadwing plus the Brightsteel Protector. Still a good play that round, not going to lie, but definitely weaker. Okay, we mentioned Promising Future. Lysandra Talia is still going to be strong, just not as explosive. It's going to lose a few percentage points on its win rate. I think it'll still stay over 50%, but it's not going to hover around that 53 to 55% win rate that the top decks of the meta have. Quicksand catches a nerf on its double ability if you split it up. Only gives -1 to the 2 units now instead of -2. Makes a lot of units a lot safer in combat now. Much tougher to just outright win 2 combats with the split Quicksand. And I think this is good. This is a very powerful thing to split onto 2 cards at the same time. And I think this is a pretty welcome nerf. Shurima might be kind of weak now, but if you want to have Quicksand going into the future, I think this is probably something that needs to happen. All right, Resplendent Celicorn caught an upgrade. Good job. Riptide Rex now plunders 7 times instead of 6. Kind of interesting if you're playing Jin or whatever, but he's still a little bit expensive for my tastes. Sands of Time, we talked about a little bit in terms of the Lysandra Talia. Same thing applies as with the Promising Promising Future, in that you're still going to play like 1 copy of the card, maybe 2. It sucks you have to do it now, but it's still a pretty reasonable combat trick, a reasonable way to stop 10 damage from hitting you, and just takes a little bit more work to set up a giant Thrall Boom. Squeaker caught a point of health, okay. Like in all the Mecha Yordles I've played, I'd never wanted Squeaker, and so he's going to need a little bit more to pop off. Whether or not that is more Mecha Yordle cards, I'm not entirely sure, but not super interested in Squeaker. The big one to me is the Arsenal. I love playing Talia Ziggs. We brought Talia Ziggs into the Gauntlet in the last week or so. I had a pretty good success with it there. This is a big one to lose Scout. That was kind of your big way to close out the games, where you would try and hit Scout Overwhelm or Scout Elusive, and then hopefully there'd be a spell shield involved. And when there were like 6 or 7 or 8 landmarks destroyed, it wasn't that rare. And so now you really miss out on those abilities to come in and hit for like 15 in a turn. And so a bit of a weakness to the Talia Lysandra there, or the Talia Ziggs, but they're still going to play the Arsenal, at least 1 copy. And so he's still going to get the job done. The Prefect gains a point of attack. That's fine. I think she's just a little bit too slow. She's a card to me to where it's like once you've played like 4 and 5 skills, when she's already on the board, you should have just won the game anyways, so not that big of a deal. Trifarian Assessor is back to relevance. They are really trying to push the likes of Ashe and the likes of Reputation with LeBlanc and Sivir. And so I don't think this is relevant now, but it kind of feels like something's in our future, and the Trifarian Assessor is really going to catch a boost in a future upcoming set release. It just, I don't know, it seems like somebody at Riot really loves all that stuff, and they want Reputation to be a thing, and the Trifarian Assessor really helps to that end. And so I don't think she's relevant now. Something to keep in the back of your mind. Vanguard First Blade catches a boost. This is one of these things to where I always wonder if the Path of Champions is going to become like a spin-off game. Like, this guy is never going to see play in Constructed, but this does fuck with all of like the limited abilities, right? Like, this would have been a gigantic change in Expedition, and it messes with a lot of stuff in Path of Champions, and it's like weird to me seeing stuff like this happen. And so I mean, maybe it matters on like a casual scale as to where like people like Garen because of League of Legends, they come into uh, uh, Legends of Runeterra. They want to play the Garen deck. They say, oh, cool, Garen's an elite. Let's play all of these elites. This guy has the tag and he's common. Now I have an elites deck. Like, maybe that's the kind of like reasoning behind this kind of thing. But this has to be like mega frustrating when you're on the Path of Champions team or you're on the Expedition team. And they're like, LOL, check this out. We're gonna put a buff onto Vanguard First Blade. And they just gotta be like, are you fucking kidding me? Okay, bring it on. This dude that's never going to be constructed relevant, you're making changes to. Okay. Thanks, Ruben Zoo. But it's interesting seeing like that. I'm sure Ruben Zoo had to buy the Path of Champions team lunch or something to get this one pushed through. On to the next one, though. Windfare Hatchling catches a point of health. This is, again, this is like a buff for elites. Most of the decks that played Windfare Hatchling in the past just play Thousand-Tailed Saiyan now because it draws cards as opposed to just giving the stats. And I don't think this point of health is what was really holding Windfare Hatchling back. I think that the Thousand-Tailed Saiyan is just leagues better than this. And I don't think the Hatchling is going to catch consideration until either A, dedicated elusives deck is big and strong, or B, the Thousand-Tailed Saiyan catches a nerf. And so I don't feel like this is currently relevant now. Okay, 2 to go. Hope you're still here with us. Yordle Contraption costs 1 less mana. Again, the Path of Champions team is getting upset. These cards that are never constructed relevant, catching changes, affecting the Path of Champions, kind of is what it is. I don't think landmarks are ever going to be strong enough to want to carry dedicated removal, and so this does matter as a kind of generated card. Stuff can generate this, I guess, but as a constructed playable card, this isn't going to catch it. And then the last one, in terms of cards, is a big one. Zenith Blade only gives Overwhelm this round now. I think this is what is going to ultimately kind of slay the Pantheon decks. It just takes so much setup to have this going as to where you want to put the Zenith Blade on your Fated unit and then you want to like develop a Cataclysm or something. It takes a lot of work. And I know we're only talking about like 6 mana in a single turn or 7 mana with a rally, but if you need to like really set that up with another combat trick or something, it starts to be running into like 7 and 8 and 9 mana. And then this also can't be run across multiple turns. And so I think it's just going to ultimately be kind of like the death knell for Pantheon in the current format. And then maybe as we have additional attached cards, additional fated cards, additional combat tricks get printed, Pantheon may find its way back into relevance. I think this is just too much for him in the current patch, and he's going to be fringe playable at this point. Okay, so that is that in terms of cards. As far as the remaining themes, all of the Path of Championers should be excited. All of your excess shards now count towards Wild Fragments. Wild Fragments can be used for anything. And then the one that's relevant to me, I've been making a bit of Path of Champions content these days. I can't unlock Annie. I can't unlock Lee Sin. You can just come out and spend coins now. So I'm glad that they are pushing like some kind of monetization into the Path of Champions. Make a couple dollars, make sure the game sticks around. By all means, you don't have to spend money on it, but I would have, spent $5 last week to get the champions I don't have just to get the content flowing with it. And so nice to have that kind of thing be available. Otherwise, some new champion skins coming out. And then I don't think there were anything in the bug fixes that were relevant. You'll occasionally catch a buff or a nerf within the bug fixes. I don't think any of this really mattered. And so that is going to be that. I hope the overview helps you in the coming days. You have the meta ready to tackle. You know what's coming at you. You're getting your pirates armed and ready. And so that is going to do it for us today. Hope everyone enjoyed the video, and you all have yourselves a good one.